Every week, our inbox fills with messages from people who saw something they can't explain. Real people. It's real terror and absolutely no campfire fiction. Tonight, we're reading 5 of the most chilling true accounts you sent us. Stories of figures in dark doorways, voices in empty rooms, and things that tap at windows long after midnight. These are your experiences, your nightmares, and now they're ours. Like this video and subscribe right now, because after tonight, you might need every light in the house. This first story was sent in by DeShawn Carter, a 34-year-old warehouse shift lead from Macon, Georgia. He'd worked at the massive regional distribution center for over 6 years, and he knew every inch of the building's grid of aisles, conveyors, and loading docks. But he'd never had a reason to go into the old stairwell at the very back of the facility until the night inventory system flagged a missing pallet of seasonal candles that the scanner swore was sitting on sublevel 2. A floor that DeShawn was certain didn't exist, because the building blueprints only showed one basement and a crawlspace. But the system insisted, and his night manager told him to take the stairs down from the break room because the freight elevator was being serviced. So he grabbed his flashlight and pushed through the heavy steel door that he'd walked past 1,000 times without ever opening, and the moment it closed behind him, he noticed how quiet it was. The constant hum of the conveyor belts completely gone, the air thick and cold and smelling faintly of damp cardboard and something else. Something sharp like burnt hair, and the stairs were old concrete, not the modern metal grating in the rest of the building. And they spiraled down much farther than a single flight. The walls narrowing and the paint changing from industrial gray to appealing mint green that looked at least 50 years out of date. And as his flashlight beam cut through the dark, he saw footprints in the dust, bare footprints that led down the steps, and they were fresh. The dust still settling at the edges, and he almost turned back right then, but the scanner beeped and the pallet ID popped up again. So he kept going, his boots loud on the concrete. And after what felt like 4 or 5 floors down, the stairs ended at a small landing with a single door, a wooden door with a glass window that was painted over in flaking black. And the footprints led right up to it and stopped, as if whoever made them had melted through the wood. And DeShawn pushed the door open into a space that was definitely not a sub-basement. It was a vast, open room with a high ceiling crisscrossed by old pipes and a floor of bare earth. And in the center of that earth floor was a single metal folding chair, and sitting in the chair was a figure. A person, or what looked like a person, but its proportions were wrong, its arms too long, and its legs bent backward like a grasshopper's. And its head was turned away from him, and it was rocking gently. And as his flashlight hit it, the rocking stopped, and the figure's head swiveled around without the rest of its body moving. And its face was DeShawn's face, a perfect replica, down to the small scar above his left eyebrow. But the eyes were black and liquid, and the mouth was smiling too wide, and it said in his own voice, "You finally found the inventory." DeShawn, I'm the missing stock. I've been waiting down here since the building was built on top of me, waiting for someone to scan me out, and DeShawn dropped the scanner and ran, his feet slipping on the packed earth. And as he reached the stairs, he heard the chair scrape, and the thing behind him rise with a sound like sticks snapping, and he didn't stop running until he was back in the break room, the steel door slamming behind him, and when he looked at the scanner, the pallet ID was gone. Replaced by a single line of text, item count adjusted, thank you for your service, and he quit the next morning. But 3 days later, he received a package at his home address. Small box wrapped in brown paper with no return address, and inside was a single candle. The wax a strange skin like pink, and when he lit it the flame was black, and the wax melted into a shape that looked exactly like the face that had worn his own. And he knows the stairwell isn't finished with him. Because sometimes at night the candle relights itself, and he can hear his own voice whispering from the hallway. Still asking to be scanned out, still waiting for someone to count it into the world. The next story comes from Marlene Ortiz, 41-year-old registered nurse working the overnight shift at a small rural hospital outside Lubbock, Texas. The hospital was old, built in the 1940s as a TB sanatorium. And the night shift nurses all had their stories about cold spots in the long-term care wing and call lights that flashed in empty rooms. But Marlene was practical and focused on her patients. And for 2 years she shrugged off the little things until the night she started hearing her name. It happened first around 2:45 a.m. during her rounds on the second floor. A whisper so faint she thought it was the wind. But the windows were sealed, and the air was still, and the whisper came again. Marlene, drawn out in a voice that sounded like her mother, who had died of cancer 8 years earlier in that very hospital, in room 217 at the end of the hall. She froze outside the door of 217, which was supposed to be empty and locked, used only for storage since her mother's passing. But the door was slightly ajar and a sliver of pale light spilled out, and the voice came again. "Marlene, come in. I need you to adjust my pillow." And it was her mother's voice. Unmistakable. The same cadence, the same soft lisp on the S. And Marlene's professional detachment crumbled under a wave of grief and longing. And she pushed the door open, and the room was not a storage closet. It was a patient room, fully made up, with a figure lying in the bed under a thin white sheet, the shape of a woman, frail and small, and the voice said, "I've been waiting for you, Mia. The other nurses never check on me. They only check on the living ones." And Marlene stepped closer, tears streaming, and reached for the edge of the sheet to pull it back. And in that instant the overhead light flickered, and she saw that the figure under the sheet had no mass. The sheet was draped over a hollow space, and the voice changed, dropping from her mother's soft tone into something wet and guttural that said, "Thank you for opening the door. Marlene, names have power, and you just gave yours to me. Now I can wear it out of this room." Which was now just a dusty storage closet filled with broken wheelchairs and boxes of old charts. And she pounded on the door until the charge nurse found her, and no one believed her story. But the following week, the hospital reported a series of strange incidents. A nurse matching Marlene's description was seen in the pediatric wing at 3 a.m., singing lullabies that made the children weep. And a patient in room 109 reported that a woman who looked like Nurse Ortiz had leaned over his bed and whispered, "Don't worry, I'm not really a nurse, but I'm learning." And Marlene took a leave of absence and moved to another state. But every night she receives a text from an unknown number that says, "Thank you for the name. Mia, I'm using it well," and attached is a photo of her own face, smiling in a dark hospital room. And she knows the thing that wears her name is still walking the night shift, still learning, still hungry, and one day it will come back to trade the name for the rest of her. Tyrell Gibson, a 27-year-old mechanic from a small town in the West Virginia Panhandle, sent us this account of what happened in the single-wide trailer he rented on a patch of wooded land 5 miles outside of town. He'd lived there alone for about a year, and the place was quiet enough that he could hear the creek gurgle behind the lot and the wind in the pines. But the quiet started to feel heavy around the end of October, When the nights got longer, and the fog rolled in from the hollow and stayed until noon, and the first tapping came on a Tuesday night while he was sitting on his couch watching a ball game. A light, deliberate rap on the trailer's aluminum door. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. As if someone was using a single knuckle. And he got up and looked through the peephole and saw nothing. Just the dark shape of his pickup and the mist. And he opened the door, and the porch was empty. No footprints on the wet leaves. And he told himself it was a branch or a bird. And he locked the door and sat back down, and the tapping came again. This time on the window beside the door. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. And he whipped the curtain aside, and there was nothing. Just his own reflection staring back at him, pale and wide-eyed. And he grabbed a baseball bat and went outside and walked the perimeter of the trailer and found no one. Nothing. The woods silent and still, and he went back inside, and the tapping stopped. But the next night it came again, and the night after that, always at 11:11 p.m., it's always 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. First on the door, then on the window, then on the metal skirting that ran along the bottom of the trailer, and by the 4th night Tyrell was terrified, because now the tapping was accompanied by a voice, a low, childlike murmur that said his name, Tyrell, stretched out in 2 syllables with a wet, bubbling quality, and the tapping moved around the trailer, circling it. And he could hear something dragging across the metal, fingernails or claws. And he hid in his bedroom with the door locked and the lights off. And the tapping came to his bedroom window. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. And the voice said, "Tyrell, I'm cold. Let me in. I've been out here so long. The ground is full of roots and I can't find my way back down." And he looked at the window and saw a face pressed against the glass, a face that was pale and bloated, the eyes milky and the mouth a black hole. And it was looking right at him, and the face smiled and the voice said, "I see you blinking, Tyrell. I see your heartbeat in your throat. You're warm and I'm so cold. Just let me in and I'll be warm again. I won't take much. It's just a little heat, just a little life. It's only fair you're living on my ground." And Tyrell screamed, and the face vanished, and the tapping stopped, and the next morning he found a depression in the soil behind his trailer. A shallow pit filled with wet leaves and old rusted metal. And a neighbor told him that there had been a house on that spot before the trailer park. A house that burned down in the 1960s, with a family inside. And the youngest child was never found in the ashes. And Tyrell broke his lease and moved out that week. But sometimes when he's staying in a motel or crashing at a friend's place, he hears 3 taps on the door at 11:11 p.m., and he knows that whatever came out of the ground has followed him, 'cause it's no longer asking to come in, it's telling him that one day he'll open the door without thinking, and it'll be waiting on the other side, cold and patient and ready to get warm. Annie Kowalski, now a 38-year-old high school teacher in Omaha, Nebraska, wrote to us about the summer she was 10 years old and spent on her grandparents' farm in the rural eastern part of the state. It's a place of wide, flat fields and a sky so big it made her dizzy, and the farm had a corn crib. A tall, narrow wooden structure with slatted sides where the harvested ears were stored too dry. And her grandparents warned her never to go inside the corn crib alone because the floor was uneven and the bins were deep. But they never told her about the shadow. The shadow was something she saw the first week of her stay. On a blistering July afternoon when she was chasing barn cats and found herself standing at the corn crib's only door. A heavy sliding plank that was half open, and inside, among the golden pile of dried ears, a patch of darkness that didn't match any object. a tall, thin smudge that stood upright and seemed to breathe. And she stared at it, and it didn't move. And she ran back to the house and didn't say anything because she wasn't sure what she'd seen. But the next day she went back, and the shadow was still there, and this time it turned, as if it had been facing the back wall, and now it was facing her, though it had no face. Just a deeper darkness where a head should be, and a voice that wasn't a voice but a feeling, a cold weight in her chest, said, "Come inside, Annie. The corn is cool and the rats are friendly. You can sleep here with me and I'll keep you safe from the sun." And she felt her feet move toward the door, her body obeying something that her mind was screaming against, and she grabbed the doorframe and held on, her knuckles white, and the shadow came closer, moving without steps, gliding over the corn. And she could smell it now. A smell like damp earth and something sweet, like rotting apples, and the feeling voice said, "Your grandmother almost came in here once when she was your age, but she was too afraid. She ran and locked the door and never told anyone. But you're braver, Annie. You're curious. You want to know what I am? I want to show you. I want to wear you like a dress and walk out into the sunlight and see what the world looks up like from inside a little girl's eyes." And Annie's grip slipped, and she stumbled inside, and the shadow closed around her, and the world went cold and dark, and she woke up hours later lying in the dirt outside the corn crib, her clothes damp with dew, the stars out, her grandmother standing over her with a lantern, her face white as milk, and she said, "You went in, didn't you, oh child? I told you never to go in. The thing in the crib has been there since my own grandmother's time. It sleeps in the corn and dreams of walking. And it almost had you, it almost put you on like a coat, and they never spoke of it again, and the corn crib was torn down the following spring. But Annie never forgot, and 30 years later she returned to the farm after her grandfather died to help clean out the house. And in the empty field where the corn crib had stood, she saw the shadow again, unchanged, still thin and dark and patient. And the feeling voice said, "You came back. I knew you would. I've been saving your shape all these years. And now you're old enough to wear," and Annie fled and has never returned. But she knows the shadow is still there, still waiting, and she's written it into her will that the field must never be built on, never be sold, never be walked by children, because some things in the soil don't die. They just wait for the next curious soul. And the corn crib may be gone, but the shadow has learned patience, and it has all the time in the world. Our final story comes from Randall Thorne, 45-year-old handyman and general contractor from Portland, Oregon, who was hired to renovate a century-old Victorian house in the Irvington neighborhood, grand old place that had been vacant for nearly a decade after the previous owner, a reclusive old woman named Edith, had died in the home, and her body wasn't discovered for 6 weeks. The new owners wanted the house gutted and modernized, and Randall's first task was to inspect the foundation and the crawlspace, a low, dirt-floored area accessed through a small hatch in the basement floor. And he pulled on his coveralls and a headlamp and lowered himself into the darkness, and immediately he noticed the smell, a thick organic odor like a greenhouse that hadn't been aired out in years. And the dirt under his hands and knees was strangely warm and slightly damp, and as he crawled toward the far end of the foundation, where a sagging beam needed replacement, he heard a voice, a whisper that seemed to come from the dirt itself, a dry, papery voice like old pages turning. And it said, "Randall, you're the first one to come down here since Edith. She used to talk to me every night. She'd sit in the parlor and I'd whisper up through the floorboards, and we'd have long conversations about the weather and the war and the price of bread. But then she stopped answering, and I was alone, so alone. The dirt has a long memory and no one to share it with. But you're here now, you're strong and warm, and you can be my new voice. I can fill you up with all the things I've kept safe in the soil. All the secrets, all the lost words, all the lives that have passed over this ground. And Randall froze, his headlamp flickering, and he felt the dirt beneath him shift, not like an earthquake, but like a great inhalation, and the voice continued. I've been here since before the house, since before the trees. I was here when the first people walked this land. I whispered to them too, and some of them stayed. They're still here, mixed into me. Their bones are my bones, and you can join them, Randall. You can lie down and let me hold you, and in 100 years, someone else will crawl into this space, and you'll whisper to them through the dirt, and you'll never be lonely again. And he saw, in the narrow beam of his headlamp, shapes pushing up from the dirt, the outlines of faces, dozens of them. Their features formed in soil and small roots, their mouths opening and closing in silent chorus. And the voice said, "Say yes, Randall. Just say yes and all your pain goes away. No more mortgages, no more aching back, no more loneliness, just the long, slow conversation of the earth." And Randall felt a profound calm settle over him, a seductive weight that made his limbs heavy, and he almost laid down, his cheek brushing the warm dirt, and in that instant his headlamp flickered back to full brightness, and he saw, inches from his face, the skull of a small animal half buried, and the shock of it broke the spell, and he scrambled backward, the dirt clinging to his coveralls, the voice rising into a howl of frustration that vibrated through the ground. And he hauled himself up through the hatch and slammed it shut and piled toolboxes on top of it. He quit the job, forfeited his deposit, never went back to that house. But sometimes, in the quiet of his own basement workshop, he hears a faint whisper rising through the concrete floor, a voice that knows his name and offers him the long sleep. And he's put the house on a list of places that should be condemned and buried. But he knows the Crawlspace doesn't care about lists. The dirt is patient, and one day when he's old and tired, he might just go back and open the hatch and finally answer yes. Those were your story's 5 true accounts sent in by real people who faced the unexplainable and lived to send us a message. To DeShawn, Marlene, Tyrell, Annie, Randall, and everyone else who shared their nightmares, thank you. This community thrives because you trust us with your most terrifying moments. And every single story we read gets taken seriously. If you have a true experience you can't shake, send it our way, drop it in the comments, email us, or message us on social media. The best will be featured in our next You Sent Us video. If these stories got under your skin, subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a Friday night deep dive into real terror. We're a small channel building something big, and your support literally keeps the lights on. Till next time, keep your doors locked, your crawl spaces sealed, and never answer a whisper that knows your name.